his discourse on method, as he is about to launch into this attempt to overcome skepticism, he lays down what he calls a provisional morality that he will follow while he's living in such uncertainty. And the provisional morality is essentially the same kind of thing. He will restrain judgment, he will restrain action until such time as he knows, and so on and so forth. So it's this picture of reason controlling emotion, reason controlling, guiding the will all the way through. No, there is a consciousness of them in the mind. Because in the mind-body interaction, just as the decisions of the will, which occur in the mind, produce bodily changes, bodily actions, so the passions, which are stirrings of the movements of the animal spirits, okay, in the body, have their conscious byproducts in the mind. And those conscious byproducts are ideas, yes, but confused ideas, adventitious ideas. And they must not dominate the body. They must not dominate the mind and cause trouble. Okay? So in that sense, it's a rationalistic kind of ethic. Yeah. We're ruled by reason. We should be, not by emotion. Spinoza likewise. Okay. The big difference in Spinoza, we'll see, is that Spinoza cannot assert the freedom of the will. He's a determinist, and that makes quite a difference. In Spinoza, you begin to pick up a rather familiar paradigm of what follows from a pantheistic point of view. You know, we met this in Plotinus, the Neoplatonist. With pantheism, you're going to have determinism. Okay? You won't have any separateness and the kind of freedom that goes with separateness such that an individual has initiative. It's self-ruled. No. And then problems arise about making any clear distinction between good and evil. Because what status is there for evil if everything is one? The distinction gets blurred. The way in which Plotinus tried to handle it was with his theory of emanations, thence degrees of, so forth. Okay. Incidentally, pantheism is not just a matter nowadays of Eastern religion, inasmuch as Eastern influences have reasserted themselves in the West. Well, at least in the western part of this country. New Age movements are essentially pantheistic. You see. All the writings of New Age are not systematic, not spelled out carefully, but there's enough there, I think, to help us see that it's a kind of pantheism. A more romanticized kind of pantheism, closer to the 19th century than it is to Spinoza. But the same sorts of paradigms occur. Okay, let's move then from his historical importance to what I've called general features. In fact, those general features are already beginning to show. And the first general feature, of course, is this view that God and nature are one and the same. God and nature are one and the same. Now, you'll find he gets into that by virtue of his concept of substance. Now, he doesn't start with a methodological doubt, no. He starts with definitions. He starts with a definition of substance, among other things. And the way he defines substance leads him to the conclusion that God and nature are one and the same thing. Okay? Now, if God and nature are one and the same thing, then you find two aspects of things. That is to say, in God, there is both thought and extension. God is infinite. Extension. As if God is the whole arena of space. But God at the same time is infinite in thought. And you get echoes here of the Platonic tradition. Or perhaps of the Stoic Logos concept. You see. Thought and extension. These are two attributes of God. One God and two known attributes. There may be other attributes we don't know. But these are two that are manifest in us and in our experience. In fact, these two attributes are evident in both infinite mode and finite modes. The infinite mode of thought is God, the mind of God. The infinite mode of extension is nature. It is all its vastness. But finite modes of thought are yours and mine. And finite modes of extension are yours and mine, bodies, as we call them. But these are not substances. Mind is not a substance separate from a body. Body is not a substance separate from mind. Your and my bodies are not substances separate from God. We are simply finite modes of the being of God. In that sense, you do think God's thoughts after him. How else could you? Your thoughts are part of God's self-consciousness. So there is no notion of separate substances in Descartes' sense. There are distinguishable attributes, distinguishable modes. You can distinguish your body from the body sitting next to you. You can distinguish your thoughts from somebody else's. But that's not a distinction of substances. It's a distinction of modes, one finite mode from another finite mode. Now, you can see in this distinction between the finite and the infinite, if you like, you can see echoes of Plato's divided line. You see. The eternal and the temporal, the infinite and the finite. Now, it's only echoes, because Plato would turn over in his grave to think of nature as eternal, you see. Although his one certainly was, but nature, not nature in any physical sense. So the Platonic echo is there, But what he's talking about is not two different realms, forms and particulars. No. What he's talking about is finite and infinite modes of one and the same realm. Finite and infinite modes of God, which is nature. Now, it's this, then, that poses the perennial problems and the perennial topics, so that in a few moments we'll be seeing how this double aspect monism of his is worked out on this whole range of dualities, where none of them represent two separate things. God and nature are not separate things. Thought and extension are not separate things. Freedom and determinism are not separate things. Good and evil are not separate things. Reason and emotion are not separate. Therefore, they're aspects of one and the same thing. Two sides of one phenomenon, all the way through. So what you need to get a hold of in terms of general features are the terms substance, attribute, and mode. Okay? Substance, attributes, and modes. And that's the overall. Make sure you're clear about that. There is only one substance. But one substance has at least two attributes. And those two attributes are identifiable in the infinite mode, but also in finite modes. You are not a being. You're a finite mode being. Your thinking is simply the finite mode of the attribute of thinking of the one all-inclusive being. You're thinking your present ideas about a finite modification mode of the infinite thinking of God. Just like substance, attribute, mode. Is that come across clearly enough? Okay, the diagram helps to catch the terminology. Okay. So that if you wanted to extend the divided line, you see, all the way down, then what you would have would be our thoughts, our bodies. Okay. These would be in the realm of particulars. Is Spinoza a realist about universals or just a conceptualist? Well, I'm inclined to say just a conceptualist. That is to say, we do really think in universal terms, in abstract terms. We do. Yeah, he's no novelist. But if a realist means, are there universal principles which are separable in some way from particulars? No. No. So closer to a conceptualist, I think. And again, the Stoic picture is the one which guides. Okay. Now, that's the first general feature to watch: substance, attributes, modes, SAM. The second general feature has to do with his epistemology. His epistemology. I've been saying that he's a rationalist. And he distinguishes three kinds of knowledge. Three kinds of knowledge, which are, 1, opinion, 2, reasoning, and 3, intuition. And this again sounds very much like Descartes. He makes this threefold distinction in a little work of his own called The Improvement of the Understanding, on the improvement of the understanding. I ran across a paperback copy of it on an airport bookstore not very long ago, entitled How to Improve Your Mind by Benedict Spinoza, translated into a how to do it thing. I suspect that anybody who was beguiled by that into buying it had a shock and wondered what they'd spent money for. But the distinction was still there. We have the distinction, however, in another place in his Ethics, and if you have the anthology with you, take a look at it, will you, on page 127. Page 127, where in a note, note 2, appended to proposition 40 of part 2 of his Ethics, okay, in that note 2 on page 127, first column, he distinguishes different kinds of knowledge. And halfway down the column, there is knowledge of the first kind, italicized, opinion or imagination. And those two refer to the 1 and 2 immediately above. Opinion has to do with fragmentary awareness of particulars. And 2 has to do with the ideas that symbols, words, arouse in the imagination. Okay? So opinion or imagination is number 1. Number 2, reason or knowledge of the second kind, because we have, as he puts it, notions common to all men, adequate ideas of the properties of things. In other words, universal truths that are commonly known. Universal truths commonly known. And then third is a third kind of knowledge, which we call intuition, which proceeds from an adequate idea of the absolute essence of attributes of God to the adequate knowledge of the essence of things. Now, obviously, he's talking here in intuition of something which is absolutely certain, which is completely indubitable. You'll find he speaks of this in terms of clear and distinct ideas. Descartes. And he uses the phrase adequate ideas most often when he wants to refer to what is intuitively certain. Remember, the way in which Descartes used clear and distinct was to say so clear and distinct as to be beyond all doubt. Now, that's what makes it adequate. It's beyond all doubt. So clear and distinct as to be beyond all doubt, intuitively certain. Adequate ideas. Now, watch for that notion of adequate ideas. He obviously is not going to give much credence to opinion and imagination. The knowledge you have that way is fragmentary, it's confused, it's empirical, it deals only with contingent matters. It's involved with the illicit associations of language due to customary usages. Okay? But that's the way religious language is, he says. So his rationalistic critique of religion and religious language is really in terms of a critique of the kinds of language used in talking about religious matters. Traditionally, it's been called the language of analogy. But analogy is not the kind of minerality of definition which Euclid wanted. It's not the kind of explicitness of mathematical reasoning, you see. And so he has no patience with that kind of language, knowledge. So his concern then is going to be to gain knowledge that is intuitively certain, that is self-evident, that is in that sense adequate. And you'll find that he sees error as due, obviously, to lack of clarity and distinctness. When you give your assent to what lacks clarity and distinctness, that's when the problem arises. Which sounds like Descartes. Okay? Well then, to start his geometrical pursuit, his method, he's going to have to start, obviously, with some adequate ideas. Because nothing else has the intuitive certainty that is required for axioms with which to begin the whole deductive system. Okay? And what he wants to do is to proceed from adequate ideas to adequate ideas to adequate ideas all the way through the chain of reasoning. He'd like to think that every proposition he lists and numbers in the ethics, hundreds of them, is logically certain. Okay? You start with what's intuitively certain and work to things that are demonstrably certain. And as in a geometrical system, you'll see he refers back in working his proofs to a definition, or to an axiom, or to a previous proposition that's been proven, or to the corollary which has been explicitly drawn, the corollary of a previous proposition that's been proven. And so the whole thing has that kind of mathematical rigor, at least in his intention. Now, I suppose it follows from that that if you don't like his conclusions, there are two things you can do. One is to question his definitions and axioms. Are the axioms axiomatic? Really? Are the definitions arbitrary? Defensible? You know, how do you define definition? You think? Is a definition something we choose in the sense that we decide how this word is going to be used, like in Alice in Wonderland? You think? If that's the way I say I'm using the word, then that's the way I say I'm using the word. That how or not? Rather crucial. The philosophy of language begins to emerge in the 17th century as crucial. We came across it in Hobbes with his nominalism. I mentioned to you that I was working on Hobbes currently, and even since we did Hobbes 2 weeks ago, I've discovered places where Hobbes says that the problems that arise with other views is because of the way people have given meanings to words. Thinking begins with definitions. You think? And for a nominalist, would you expect that? You think? Not with ideas, but with words is where thinking begins. So, okay, any questions, comments before we dive right into it? Those two general features. Okay, if the first one has to do with substance, attributes, and modes, the second one has to do with the leftovers, namely opinion, reason, and intuition. All right, let's turn our attention then, shall we, to some of these double aspects. That's what's going to have to occupy us for the rest of Spinoza. So, God and nature. God and nature. Turn in the anthology to page 110 and look at the definitions. Obviously, to do Spinoza justice, we'd have to weigh all of these definitions and all the axioms and work again all of the proofs. Though Kaufmann has omitted a lot. This is a selection after all. But I just want to catch one or two of the proofs that stand out as being very significant. The first definition shouldn't surprise you. By that which is self-caused, I mean that of which the essence involves existence. That of which the nature is only conceivable as existent. Now, that's the scholastic way of talking about God, whose essence involves existence. That was the basis for Descartes' argument for the existence of God in Meditation 5, his ontological argument, from the concept of God as one whose essence involves existence. Okay? Then look down at definition 3. By substance.